Ding dong, you're dead was the tagline that accompanied the 1986 horror comedy movie House. In House, we follow the exploits of Roger Cobb, played by William Catt, as in that guy who took Carrie White to the prom and the great American hero. Despite the fact that Cobb is a successful author, he is a troubled young man, suffering post-traumatic stress from fighting the war in Vietnam, having his son simply disappear, going through a divorce, and to top it off, his aunt commits suicide. Cobb returns to his aunt's home to clear his head and to try and piece together the puzzle of what happened to his son. But it soon becomes clear that the house is being plagued by sinister, evil forces who try to tear Cobb's life apart. Is Cobb going mad from all the trauma in his life, or is this the work of an enemy he made during the Vietnam War, Big Ben, who has come back from beyond the grave to seek revenge? When it comes to guilty pleasures, to me, this one is the most guilty pleasurist, due to its silliness and cheesiness and bizarre out-of-place music montages. But damn if this movie hasn't got heart and isn't enjoyable. And seeing how 1980s guilty pleasure is kind of my thing at the moment, how could I possibly refuse a top 10 countdown of things you didn't know about the movie House? Let's check it out. Number 10. Where's the rotting hand? One thing that strikes me about the movie House is its movie's poster, as we see a rotten, decaying zombie hand ringing on a doorbell. It assures the viewer that ghosties and ghouls are going to come a-knocking in this movie, and let the good times roll. However, this rotting hand never actually appears in the film. Nope, not at all. Okay, there is a severed hand in the film, which belongs to a zombie ghost creature that impersonated Cobb's ex-wife, but clearly it's a different hand. Could it be the main villain Big Ben's hand? Well, I don't know, but we never see his hand get severed. So thus this hand, which has no doubt allured many people into watching the movie, never shows up. Number 9. Famous co-stars. There are actually a lot of famous faces that show up throughout the movie House. Interesting cameos that you honestly wouldn't expect. First of all, there's George Wendt, who's best known for his role in Cheers, but I'll always remember him for starring in Dreamscape, who plays Cobb's concerned neighbour. Then there's Minty Sterling, who is best known for playing Dr. Evil's love interest in the Austin Powers series. Well, in House, she could be spotted at the very start as an enthusiastic fan of Cobb's. The real estate agent who shows Cobb around the property at the start of the movie is the manager of the posh hotel in Ghostbusters. You know, the guy who tells Peter Venkman he had no idea that's how much it'll cost and that he won't pay. Cobb's ill-fated aunt is played by Susan French, who also played the old woman on the beach in Jaws 2 who witnessed the boat exploding. Swedish model Mary Stavin played Cobb's other neighbour, and 1 year before House, she saved James Bond in an iceberg submarine in the Bond movie A View to a Kill. And finally, Stephen Williams, most famous for his roles in The X-Files and 21 Jump Street, plays a cop who pays Cobb a visit. What, was there no room for Nicolas Cage as well? Number 8, Big Ben really was big. directed by Steve Miner. And he got the job directing the movie because he was seen as something of a horror maestro, having previously directed Friday the 13th 2 and Friday the 13th 3D. So if the filmmaker who gave Jason Voorhees his iconic hockey mask isn't good enough for your horror movie, then no one is. Miner's horror days kept on after House, as he went on to direct Warlock, Halloween H2O, Lake Placid, and the 2008 version of Day of the Dead. But he doesn't just dabble in horror, as he has also directed episodes of well-known classic TV series, such as The Wonder Years, Dawson's Creek, and Smallville.
Okay, I'm calling it now. The Wonder Years would have been epic if this demonic bitch kept turning up to wreak havoc on Kevin Arnold's life.
Number 5. Humourless Ghouls.
This is dedicated to the one I love.
The screenplay was initially written by Fred Decker, who had previously written the screenplays for The Monster Squad, Night of the Creeps, and would go on to write RoboCop 3 and Star Trek Enterprise. However, Decker's original script was a lot darker and grim than the final result. His original vision was that of a straight-up contemporary horror film with no room for gags. However, when fellow writer Evan Wiley came on board to do rewrites, it was decided that the movie shouldn't be so bleak and morbid. So Wiley gave the movie its trademark humour that it's well known for. And to me, the cheeky humour in the movie just makes it that bit more appealing and enjoyable. Number 4. House Franchise.
Dedicated to the one I love. This is
Of course, as with most popular films, House would go on to get a string of sequels, including House 2, which came out 1 year later in 1987. And despite its title, House 2: The Second Story, the movie is a standalone film and doesn't have anything to do with the original. House 2 also made back $10 million out of a $3 million budget, and even got its own Marvel comic. When we get to House 3 is when things get weird. Released in 1989 and yet again another standalone film, this entry was much more brutal and intense than the first two, and also didn't feature the comical humour side of the first entries. In fact, the film's distributors thought that the movie had strayed so much from the House franchise, it was released under the title of Horror Show. It did, however, maintain its original title of House 3 in Europe. Then in 1992, with the release of House 4, is when we get to the direct-to-video stage of the franchise. But at least House 4 tries to connect with the first movie, as it brings back William Katt as Roger Cobb. However, he dies early in the film. I can remember watching House 4 a few years ago, and I felt like the mood of the movie kept shifting. It kept changing from ridiculous cheeky humour of the first movie 1 minute to trying to be dark and taken seriously the next.
Yeah, look, it wasn't a very good film, and no House movies have been made ever since then.
Number 3. The movie's Hong Kong title. I've said it once and I'll say it again. It's very common for movies to be given different titles when marketed overseas, and House was no exception, as when released over in the shores of Hong Kong, the movie was retitled to Don't Go Into the Haunted House After Midnight. Damn, that's quite a mouthful, right? But above all, the title actually doesn't really make any sense. After all, the ghouls didn't just come out after midnight. They were there all hours of the day to torment Cobb. So it makes me wonder if the Hong Kong Film Board even saw the movie in the first place.
Because technically the movie should have been called Don't Go Into the House no matter what time it is, Eastern Standard Time or otherwise. I guess that just would have been too long.
Number 2. A Touch of Jason Voorhees.
That's just the way it is.
One of the stunt coordinators of the movie was none other than Kane Hodder, and as most of you horror movie buffs would know, Hodder, to many, is the face of Jason Voorhees. From the Friday the 13th series, having played the hockey mask wearing serial killer in 4 entries, including Friday the 13th 7, The New Blood, Friday the 13th 8, Jason Takes Manhattan, Jason Goes to Hell, The Final Friday, and of course Jason X, and not to mention of course the Friday the 13th video game. Hodder also played Leatherface in the stunt scenes in a Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3. So it's just a nice piece of knowledge in knowing that such a famous horror guru who has taken on the form of both Jason and Leatherface also helped to craft the movie House. Number 1. Influenced by the Twilight Zone.
Oh, but don't you believe it?
In 1983, a theatrical version of the 1950s TV show The Twilight Zone came out. Produced by Steven Spielberg, the movie was an anthology movie, consisting of 4 separate stories. And it was this movie that actually led to the creation of the movie House. According to the original scriptwriter Fred Decker, after seeing the Twilight Zone movie, he and other scriptwriters decided to make their own anthology movie. It was to be an independent movie made up of 4 non-related stories, and the segment that Decker wrote was the same story as House. However, the project fell through and didn't take place. So Decker decided to use the story that he was writing about a Vietnam veteran living in his auntie's haunted house as its own movie, as Decker decided to make an entire movie out of his segment. And thus, that's how House came to be.
So, no Twilight Zone, no House. So, I'm going to wrap up this countdown review and say the usual stuff where I say I hope you enjoyed it, blah blah blah. You all know the drill by now. But I will say this, if you awesome people out there love your 80s cheese fests and you haven't seen House yet, are you kidding me? Just stop whatever it is you're doing and just go and watch it now. It's not a brilliant movie, but it's a pretty enjoyable one, with that lovable silliness that always seems to accompany the 1980s. Anyway, I'm Minty, and House.